Let's explain the numbers too, because people need to know how fucking crazy it is here in Texas.
And of course these numbers are not going to be clearly defined. It's hard to get a census on hogs. So the estimate in the United States is around 6 million. The estimate here in Texas is between 2 and 4 million. So probably somewhere in the middle of that, maybe 2.6. That's a number that you'll see a lot, maybe around 3 million, but whatever.
So literally more than the entire population of Austin.
In hogs. Spread out around the state.
Picture a battlefield with no soldiers, no headlines, and no ceasefire in sight. That is what large parts of rural Texas have quietly become. Losses counted every year in the tens of millions of dollars, in ruined pastures, in fences torn open under moonlight. One animal drives that destruction more than any other, moving through the darkness, tearing the earth apart before dawn, and vanishing before anyone can react. This is the story of how a species never meant to exist on this continent multiplied into the millions across Texas, and of one strange stretch of time when something began making those animals disappear, not by the dozen, but all at once, without a single body ever turning up. To understand why that disappearance stunned wildlife biologists, you first need to understand how deep this crisis already ran. Feral hogs do not belong on this continent. Swine first crossed the Atlantic with Christopher Columbus in 1493, carried to the West Indies as cheap, hardy protein for long ocean crossings. Decades later, when the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto landed on Florida's coast in 1539, he brought more. As expeditions pushed deeper into unmapped territory, pigs slipped away from camps or were abandoned outright, and the ones that survived adapted, bred, and across 4 centuries never really stopped. For most of that time, nature kept their numbers in check. Predators, harsh winters, and limited range held the population steady. Then, in the final decades of the 20th century, that containment broke. Between 1982 and 2016, the wild pig population of the United States rocketed from roughly 2.4 million animals to nearly 6.9 million. That is not a slow climb. That is a fuse being lit. Nowhere absorbed the blast harder than Texas, now home to an estimated 2.6 million feral hogs, more than any other state in the country, confirmed in 253 of its 254 counties. Only El Paso remains free of a documented population, and even that may just be a matter of time. Forget the image of a slow, harmless farm pig. A mature feral boar can weigh 400 pounds, armed with tusks sharp enough to gut livestock or an unwary human. They eat almost anything in their path: crops, roots, eggs, ground-nesting birds, even deer fawns, and move in tightly organized family groups called sounders, commanded by a dominant sow with almost military discipline. Their reproduction defies every attempt to slow it. A single sow can produce 2 litters a year, up to 12 piglets each, and under good conditions, an entire population can double in under 12 months. You cannot out-hunt that math. The destruction that follows is not abstract. When a sounder crosses a cornfield at night, the field looks by morning like heavy machinery tore through the dark soil. Pastures nurtured for years get shredded in a single evening. Native grasses that hold topsoil in place get uprooted, and riverbanks collapse under the weight of their wallowing, clouding water supplies for miles. In Texas alone, the annual cost tops $52 million. Nationally, the figure climbs past $2.5 billion every year, and that doesn't even count the quieter toll. Vanished native plants, disrupted soil, and relentless pressure on wildlife that never evolved defenses against an invader like this. Landowners have thrown nearly everything at the problem. Leg-hold traps along worn game trails, corral traps baited with corn and watched remotely by smartphone, night hunts with thermal optics that turn pitch darkness into a glowing green field where nothing can hide its heat, warfarin-based toxicants finally approved after years of regulatory fights, and helicopter sweeps that take out entire sounders from the air, part pest control, part spectacle. Texas law allows all of it. Hogs can be hunted on private land at any hour, any day, by nearly any method, with no license and no limit. Some years the numbers dipped, but the hogs always came back. Always. Until 2024, when something started happening that fit no pattern anyone had seen before. Wildlife agencies across several counties began fielding an unusual kind of report, not complaints about surging hog activity, but confusion over its sudden absence. This didn't look like a successful hunt. Organized removal leaves evidence, carcasses that get logged and counted. What was unfolding around Blanco County left no such trail. Traps that had reliably caught hogs for months sat untouched. Feeding sites were abandoned, and cameras that once captured dozens of hogs a night came back blank. Landowners who'd watched large sounders cross their land for years said the animals hadn't relocated next door. They had vanished, and nobody could explain where or why. Disease seemed the obvious explanation. Feral hogs carry pathogens like swine brucellosis, pseudo-rabies, and various strains of influenza, and an outbreak can tear through a population fast. But outbreaks leave fingerprints, carcasses along creek beds, sick animals showing the lethargy any wildlife veterinarian would recognize instantly. None of that was present. No sick hogs, no decomposing bodies, just an eerie silence where chaos used to live. The scale ruled out ordinary hunting just as decisively. A single sounder can include 15 to 20 animals functioning as one social unit, and wiping out an entire one takes sustained planning and time. Even the most relentless professional operations rarely eliminate a full group in one effort, because hogs learn fast and shift their routines the moment they sense danger. Yet what was being reported spanned dozens of groups across multiple counties, some gone within days. No hunting operation moves with that kind of efficiency. Something else was driving this, and researchers decided the only way to find out was to stop guessing and start watching. In Blanco County, biologists deployed a network of motion-triggered infrared trail cameras along the exact corridors feral hogs favored. Worn trails, shared water sources, and feeding grounds with a long history of heavy traffic. The team set the cameras and stepped back, returning only to swap memory cards, minimizing every trace of their presence. For 3 straight weeks, the cameras rolled through the night. The first stretch of footage looked like any quiet corner of the hill country after dark. Deer grazing before slipping into the cedar brush. Raccoons working the water's edge. Coyotes trotting the trails, heads low. Nothing unusual. A handful of times that first week, small groups of hogs appeared at the frame's edge, cautious, moving with the wariness of animals long hunted. Then in the second week, the hogs simply stopped showing up, and something else began appearing in their place. What the cameras captured next left every biologist who reviewed it stunned. This wasn't the erratic wandering of a coyote chasing an easy meal. A large predator was moving through the territory with almost surgical precision, hunting deliberately, night after night, in patterns that suggested it knew this ground intimately. It understood exactly where the trails converged, where the hogs came to drink. It approached from downwind every time, keeping its scent hidden, using shallow ravines, brush lines, and rock outcroppings as cover, staying low and patient until close enough to strike. When it found a sounder, it didn't charge the nearest animal. It watched first, reading the group by position and behavior, before moving in a way built to scatter the herd and isolate a weaker animal before committing to the strike. This wasn't raw instinct on autopilot. It was calculated hunting, sharpened by real experience with this exact terrain and prey. Across multiple nights, the same pattern repeated. The predator returning to ground it had already cleared, sweeping through it methodically until nothing remained. Wildlife biologists described it as textbook, high-order predatory behavior, the kind tied almost exclusively to large felids operating in territory they know as well as their own bodies. The moment the predator's identity was confirmed, it sent a shockwave through the wildlife management community, forcing a rewrite of a long-standing assumption. For decades, the working theory held that Texas feral hogs lived in a landscape essentially free of natural predators, with human intervention and the occasional disease outbreak the only real checks. Coyotes might snatch a stray piglet, but were never a serious threat to a defended sounder. The idea that a native predator could systematically dismantle entire family groups had barely been taken seriously. But once researchers looked more closely, they found the evidence had been building quietly for years. A landmark study from the Borderlands Research Institute had already tracked 16 GPS-collared mountain lions across the Davis Mountains of West Texas, documenting their behavior across 200 confirmed kill sites. The data was striking. Feral hogs ranked among the top prey species in the mountain lion diet, right alongside deer, elk, and javelina, hunted with a consistency that upended what wildlife managers assumed a native predator was capable of. Mountain lions, also called cougars, pumas, or panthers, are the largest wildcats left in North America, with roots in Texas stretching back thousands of years. They once ranged across nearly the entire state, until generations of predator control programs, driven heavily by livestock industry pressure, pushed them into the most remote corners of West and South Texas. By the mid-20th century, they had all but disappeared from vast stretches of their historical range. But quietly, they had been finding their way back. Over the past decade, trail cameras across the hill country and Edwards Plateau logged mountain lion sightings with growing frequency in counties where none had been confirmed in living memory. Young males, pushed out of crowded core territories as those populations slowly recovered, were dispersing into new ground and discovering millions of feral hogs there, predictable in habit, clustered around water and feed, in many ways easier to hunt than the deer these cats had always relied on. This is where the Blanco County footage stops being a strange local story and becomes genuinely significant for wildlife management statewide. It wasn't an isolated event. It was a glimpse into a larger shift already spreading across the hill country, one in which a returning native apex predator was beginning to exert real, measurable pressure on one of the most destructive invasive species Texas has ever faced. These cats weren't passing through. They were settling, claiming ground, hunting with an efficiency human-run programs had never matched. Once the research team understood what they were witnessing, they made an unusual decision. They pulled every camera out of the field. This wasn't a retreat born of uncertainty, but a calculated choice grounded in a deep understanding of mountain lion behavior. These animals are extraordinarily sensitive to human presence, and an individual that detects consistent signs of people in its hunting ground will alter its behavior, sometimes abandoning territory where it has already built the hard-won knowledge that makes successful hunting possible. If there was a real chance to let this predator-prey dynamic continue on its own terms, the worst thing researchers could do was leave a human footprint behind to disturb it. The implications reach far beyond one county. Wildlife managers across Texas have spent years fighting not just raw hog numbers, but the sheer scale of the territory involved. Trapping works but is labor-intensive. Aerial hunting delivers fast results but demands helicopters, crews, and funding few counties can sustain indefinitely. Toxicant programs show promise but remain politically contentious. Every method shares the same weakness. The moment human investment stops, populations bounce back. They always have. A native predator working its own claimed territory needs none of that. It hunts because hunting is what it is built to do, on ground that is now its home, with a consistency no funded program has ever matched. And if what happened in Blanco County was not a one-off, but a pattern repeating across multiple territories where mountain lions are re-establishing, the combined effect on feral hog numbers across central Texas could be larger than anyone has yet calculated. Consider what it actually means ecologically for an apex predator to return to ground it was absent from for generations. The effect doesn't stop with the animals it directly kills. Once feral hogs sense a predator sharing their territory, their behavior shifts. They grow warier, spend less time in open feeding areas, and avoid terrain that might put them at a disadvantage. This phenomenon, well documented in wolf and elk dynamics in Yellowstone and in big cat and ungulate systems across Africa, is known among ecologists as the landscape of fear. A predator doesn't need to kill every animal in an area to reshape how the whole population behaves. The mere knowledge that a mountain lion might be near changes where hogs feed and how long they linger, cutting agricultural damage before a single hog is killed. None of this makes mountain lions a complete answer to the crisis. Even a genuinely recovered population would remain small relative to millions of hogs scattered across the state, since these cats exist naturally at low densities across enormous home ranges, and even the richest territory can only support a handful at a time. The helicopters, the trapping lines, the toxicant research, none of it becomes unnecessary. But the footage from Blanco County, layered against the Davis Mountains data, points towards something wildlife science hadn't fully appreciated: that native predators, given real room to operate, can become genuine partners in managing an invasive species. Reaching ground human programs can't economically cover. There's another layer tied to a policy shift Texas was already quietly making. Beginning September 1st of 2024, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department introduced the first regulations in state history governing mountain lion hunting and trapping. The underlying classification didn't change. They remain unprotected non-game animals, huntable year-round on private land without a license or limit. But for the first time, the rules explicitly banned canned hunts, trapping a lion, holding it captive, then releasing it into an enclosure to be shot at close range, and required anyone setting traps capable of catching one to check them every 36 hours. Not sweeping protection, but the first formal safeguard these animals had ever received in Texas, arriving almost the exact moment footage was forcing biologists to reconsider their ecological role. Weeks after that footage was reviewed, the rancher whose land sat at the center of it walked his fields the way he had for years, only now the ground told a different story. It was undisturbed in a way it hadn't been in a long time. The rooting damage had simply stopped. His traps sat empty, not because the hogs had grown wise to them, but because there were none left to catch. Not relocated down the road. Gone, in a way that finally felt like it might last. He hadn't changed anything about his own approach. He had simply been living on land where, unnoticed, night after night while he slept, a mountain lion had been quietly working, and in a few weeks that single animal had accomplished what years of expensive human effort never had. No budget, no plan, no announcement, just a predator doing what predators have always done. That is the real story hidden inside this footage. Not a monster to fear, but a predator carrying out exactly the role it evolved to play, restoring balance to a landscape that had spent decades tilting out of it. Feral hogs arrived because people brought them, then lost control of what they'd introduced. They thrived because the natural checks that would have restrained them had been dismantled by generations of predator eradication campaigns built to protect short-term ranching interests at the expense of long-term ecological stability. In trying to make the land safer for cattle, those campaigns had unintentionally built a paradise for one of the most destructive invasive species in American history. What the cameras recorded was nature attempting, slowly and imperfectly, to correct course, one predator, one territory, one dismantled sounder at a time. It isn't a solution, but it's proof that a battered landscape still carries the tools for its own repair, and a reminder that the relationship between predator and prey, shaped across millions of years, isn't some relic of the past. It's a living system, and when given room to breathe, it still works exactly as it always has. The researchers who withdrew from Blanco County knew they couldn't predict what came next. That mountain lion might move on, and hogs from neighboring properties might drift back in over the following months. Wildlife ecology rarely deals in guarantees, but the footage was real, the hunting behavior was real, The cleared territory was real, and the idea that a native predator reclaiming its historical range could become part of the answer to one of the most stubborn wildlife problems in the American West is something that can no longer be dismissed. The war across Texas is nowhere near finished. 6 million feral hogs do not vanish because one mountain lion cleared one county. The crop damage will keep coming. The trapping lines and helicopter sweeps will keep running, and all of it remains necessary. But somewhere out in the Texas Hill Country tonight, between the cedar thickets and pale limestone ridges, a large cat is moving silently through ground it now considers its own. It isn't thinking about invasive species policy, budget cycles, or a century of political tension over Texas wildlife. It's thinking about the next hunt, a scent on the wind, a sound drifting up from a draw 100 yards north, about how the folds of this land offer cover to anything patient enough to use them. And in that ancient, precisely tuned purpose, it is quietly doing something no amount of human ingenuity has yet managed to replicate at scale. It is winning.